Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're taking back time as we begin our journey through Life is Strange. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Life is Strange is a choice-based, narrative-driven game released episodically by publisher Square Enix in 2015. It follows the story of Max Caulfield, a young woman who discovers she has the power to reverse time, shortly after moving back to her childhood hometown of Arcadia Bay, Oregon. She was 13 years old when her family decided to move away from Arcadia Bay, heading for Seattle and taking her away from her best friend, Chloe Price. 5 years later, after turning 18, Max was able to secure a spot in a prestigious private senior high school based in Arcadia Bay, known as the Blackwell Academy, and that's where we can find her in the beginning of the game. Well, that is after experiencing what appears to be some kind of dream or vision that she's having in the middle of her photography class. There's a storm going on, and as we make our way through the woods the dream takes place in, we find a massive tornado making its way toward what we will eventually find out is Arcadia Bay. Just as a boat is picked up and hurled at the lighthouse above Max, toppling the top of the tower and sending it careening down on top of us, the dream ends and we find ourselves sitting in the middle of a lesson about cameras. There's a bunch of typical teenage stuff going on, like students throwing things across the room and ignoring the teacher, and for a moment my mind went back to my own high school days. High school is one of those times that people either look back fondly on or would prefer to forget. You're stuck in a building with typically hundreds of other teens, all fighting their raging hormones and dealing with their own version of figuring out who they are and what they're going to become. There's typically a social hierarchy involved, made up of groups like jocks, nerds, preppy kids, theater kids, the goth kids, and other groups that all think they are unique because they are just so different from everyone else. I personally hated high school, though that was mainly because I have a tendency to flout authority, which doesn't go well when you have parents, teachers, and coaches all expecting you to follow the rules exactly as they're laid out, no matter how dumb they might be. Despite that, I'm sure there are several kids we'll meet in Blackwell that I, and most of you, will be able to relate to as we go through the series. I can definitely relate to Max in at least one aspect though, as we share a love of photography. It's that love that drove her to apply to Blackwell Academy in the first place, and as we get the chance to read her journal, which isn't creepy because as she is the player character, we technically wrote it, we find out a little about who she is and what the school is like. She's at least somewhat adventurous, as she seems to have been expecting Seattle to be more exciting, and as she alludes to plans to go on adventures with her former best friend Chloe. She also seems to be wanting, at least a little, to reinvent herself, as she writes about maybe getting a new wardrobe, cutting her hair, and getting some tattoos or a piercing. Again, typical teenage stuff, trying to figure out who she is and what she wants out of life. She also definitely has a case of imposter syndrome, that feeling of being inadequate at something even when you know that you have a ton of experience and are likely better than you realize, as she talks about being both excited and scared to have her photography shown to a wider audience. That feeling is shown even more throughout the game as we see her photography teacher, Mr. Jefferson, ask pretty relentlessly about a photo entry she's supposed to be submitting in an ongoing contest. The bulk of the journal is detailing the unease Max feels on her first day and goes over the social scene, while introducing some characters that we'll be meeting as we go. But there's one thing I want to hone in on. There's a mention of a group called the Vortex Club, and a couple of bullies that run the thing. Victoria is one of them, being kind of the poster child mean girl type. But the one I really want to talk about is Nathan Prescott. He's someone we'll be discussing a lot through this series. And before I even met him, I knew exactly how I would feel about him, just based on the description Max gives in her journal. His family is extremely wealthy, and it's pretty obvious he suffers from a major case of nepotism. For those who don't know, nepotism is when the kid or other relative of someone rich and powerful is more or less handed things like jobs and positions they don't deserve and aren't qualified for, simply because they are related to someone with influence. We see this all the time in the real world, on both a local scale, with small towns being rife with this kind of corruption, and on a bigger national scale, when we see the children, friends, and family of rich and powerful individuals being put into positions of power either in big companies or even in the government. It is an absolutely atrocious practice because it favors knowing the right people and sucking up to them over being qualified or knowledgeable in a particular skill set. And it's something I'm going to call out every time because it should never happen. But we'll be getting much deeper into that when the time comes. The other big thing from the journal is the mention of how Max hasn't spoken to her supposed best friend forever, Chloe, in the 5 years she's been absent from Arcadia Bay. And that kind of sticks Max in the penalty box in my mind from the beginning. You can't call someone your best friend and then go no contact for 5 years just because you moved away. You at least make an attempt. Letters, cards, the occasional phone call, anything other than radio silence. Getting out of the journal and back into the classroom, the bell rings to signal the end of class, and Max makes her way out into the hallway after a brief discussion with her teacher about the photo she hasn't submitted yet, and a check-in with a girl named Kate, who we know from reading the journal is one of the few friends Max seems to have in the school. Making her way through the throng of high school students, Max finds herself alone in the girls' bathroom, splashing water on her face while contemplating her life and the photo she wants to enter into the contest. Deciding the photo wasn't worth keeping, she tears it up and tosses it on the ground, showing that she also doesn't care too much about the janitorial staff. It's at that moment, though, that things start going off the rails for Max. A blue butterfly floats in through the open bathroom window, catching her attention and causing her to take out her camera to get an image of the thing as it settles onto a mop bucket. She's only just taken the shot when the bathroom door opens and Nathan Prescott walks in. The fact that he's chosen to just waltz into the girls' bathroom like he owns the place tells us everything we need to know about what kind of person he is. This isn't some mistake where he accidentally walked into the wrong bathroom in a public building he's unfamiliar with. He came in here for a reason. He seems pretty shaken about something and reassures himself in the mirror that he's in total control of things, even suggesting he could destroy the school if he wanted and get away with it. We've barely spent any time with him, and it's clear we can add narcissism to the list of issues he has. But as he's talking to himself, we find out the reason for his nervousness as a blue-haired girl comes traipsing in to confront him about what seems to be a drug deal. She's threatening to go to his parents when he pulls a gun on her, and within seconds the thing goes off, presumably killing the girl and bringing Max out of her hiding spot to try and intervene. But something happens in that moment that will change everything for Max and many others. Time slows to a crawl, stopping completely and seeming to reverse in a split second that winds up making the whole thing seem like nothing more than a dream as Max once again wakes up in her photography classroom. We're basically living through Inception at this point, a dream nestled in a dream, and there's no way to know what's real and what's not. And imagine for just a second that you'd gone through something similar. where you'd had back-to-back dreams that were so real you couldn't tell the dream from reality, and you found yourself waking up in a world that was familiar but that you couldn't be sure wasn't just another dream. This kind of experience would cause even the best of us to question the very reality we live in. And it causes Max to question herself a bit as well, as she experiences what has to be a serious hit of déjà vu, with things in this new possible dream playing out just like they did the first time she thought she'd woken up. As she recounts the events of that dream, she knocks her camera off her desk, causing it to shatter and surprisingly not catching the attention of everyone else in the room. This is kind of an annoying moment, if I'm being honest, because how in the world does no one react to a camera falling off a desk and shattering in the middle of a photography class? The teacher just goes on talking like nothing happened, and I have to wonder how competent he is. Especially as he made a point of calling out Max for taking a selfie in the earlier iteration of this situation. Something he'll do again in a couple of minutes when we manage to reverse time and fix the camera. That's right, the first thought to pop into Max's head after breaking her camera is, hey, those possible dreams I was having might have actually been proof I can reverse time, so I'm going to try that instead of reaching down to pick up the pieces of my camera. Putting her hand up and concentrating with no real idea what she's doing, she manages to go backwards in time a few seconds, repairing her camera and allowing her to take the selfie heard round the world once again. Using her newly discovered power, and never once questioning if this whole thing is actually reality or just another dream, Max manages to impress Mr. Jefferson by answering a question she didn't know the answer to, by essentially plagiarizing the answer from another student. And this opens a can of worms that will keep spilling non-stop for a while. We're going to see Max using this power a lot to direct conversations in ways that benefit her. In this early instance, she'll be stealing the answer of the question about the process that gave birth to the first selfie portraits from Victoria, the aforementioned Vortex Club leader. But in other instances, we'll see her getting information or using the words of someone she's talking to in manipulative ways that border on unethical. For instance, just a few moments after stealing Victoria's answer, Max uses her ability to rewind time to quote John Lennon in an attempt to get Mr. Jefferson off her back about the photo contest. This by itself wouldn't be bad, but she's actually just throwing the quote Mr. Jefferson used back at him after rewinding time and pretending that she pulled it out herself. This kind of manipulation doesn't lead to healthy relationships, and the fact that she's so willing to use it kind of betrays some poor social skills that she needs to work on. And it's kind of ironic in a way, because Max calls out similar behavior in Victoria, noting in her journal and even in private thoughts that the other girl is trying to manipulate Mr. Jefferson and others by telling them what they want to hear and basically faking interest. And now Max is participating in a variation of that very thing. But the rewind ability isn't just about manipulating people, as she soon figures out it can be used for saving lives. Making her way back to the bathroom, she manages to trigger the fire alarm just in time to save the girl Nathan shot from certain death, and after waiting for both her and Nathan to clear out, Max leaves the bathroom and winds up telling the principal what she saw. A couple of things here. For one, the principal isn't too concerned about the alarm as he tells the security guard to shut it off, as if there couldn't possibly be a real fire to worry about. This is incredibly stupid on his part, and it's complacency like this that leads to lives being lost in real emergencies. Besides that debacle, when I told him Nathan had a gun, he seemed less than enthusiastic about the claim, and even went so far as to insinuate that any accusations would be seen as less credible because of the Prescott family's standing in the community. And that just builds on the earlier talk of nepotism, and even expands the conversation into how these kind of families are viewed in the world that we live in. Often, wealth equals power because people who aren't wealthy are chasing the imaginary pot of gold at the end of the truly rich person's rainbow. Those who desire wealth and power will go out of their way to impress those who have the wealth and power in the hopes that some of the breadcrumbs from the wealthy table will fall their way. But it's more than that, because even those who aren't chasing wealth will fall in line with the desires of the rich and powerful out of fear. If you go against the grain, you could find yourself in a world of trouble as the minions of the wealthy take you down in a sycophantic bid to please those in the upper rung. This means that a family like the Prescotts can have a stranglehold on a small town because people are more likely to worship or fear them than to actually stand up and be crushed under the weight of their power. We'll put a pin in that though, because it'll be increasingly relevant as we move throughout the story. Leaving the school and heading for our dorm, we wind up running into one of the parts of the game I really don't like: the puzzles. Now, I'm only bringing this aspect up because there are a lot of these kinds of situational instances that I personally find more annoying than anything. This particular puzzle involves exploring the area to figure out a way to make Victoria and her friends move away from the door so that we can go inside, and for me, it distracts from the story and takes me out of the moment. I love the conversational parts and the investigative aspects that we'll get into later on, but these figure out how to overcome the arbitrary obstacle features are about as frustrating to me as the quick-time events that I hated in games like The Walking Dead and Detroit Become Human. I get why they exist, as most people want the gamified elements to provide a sense of accomplishment that comes with the shallower mechanics. But I would have enjoyed the game so much more if I wasn't being tasked with random puzzle events all the time. After rewinding and trying things out for way longer than I should have needed to, I made my way into the dorm and spent some time checking out the space for any possible story elements and characters worth chatting up. While I did grab some lore and information that will be talked about when the time comes up in the story, the main purpose of going to the dorm was so we could get a flash drive that needed to be returned to Max's friend Warren. That retrieval wasn't as simple as I thought it would be, as we needed to resolve a dispute between a couple of other girls before getting the flash drive back from the girl who borrowed it from us. But after a little espionage and drama, we recovered the drive and headed out to meet Warren. On the way, we actually stumble into something that will drive the story a lot more than I expected, as we see the security guard harassing Kate, and we have to choose to either step in and help her out, or take a photo to document the activity. My first instinct here was to take the photo, and that was what I wound up doing initially. I don't like to see abuses of power like that, and getting some hard evidence of the event seemed like the logical thing to do, with my hope being that I would be able to use it later to get the security guard in trouble. But after seeing Kate's reaction to me leaving her hanging and thinking it over, I decided to rewind and step in. Overall, as much as the photo might have been useful at some point, it only captures the moment and isn't really proof of anything other than Kate being yelled at by campus security. Anyone could argue that she had maybe done something wrong that got her yelled at, making the photo kind of moot. She also seemed to be in need of a friend in the moment, and ultimately, having someone stand up for her while also providing a visible witness to the argument makes more sense to me. Finally, reaching the parking lot, we're introduced to Warren, and we're able to have a short conversation with him before being interrupted by Nathan Prescott, who isn't happy that we told on him. And, are you serious right now? The principal is quickly climbing the ladder on my shit list. Most organizations, schools, workplaces, and the like have the concept of anonymous reporting and will encourage people to speak up if they see something going on that shouldn't be happening. This protects the reporter from retaliation and means that people are more likely to report possible dangerous or illicit activities. This is a good thing, because on the whole, it's actually better for someone to speak up and have an incident wind up being nothing, than to have someone stay quiet for fear of retribution and have the incident get people injured or killed. The principal knows the Prescott family is vindictive, and that Nathan isn't as good as everyone pretends, and yet he still told the boy that Max was the one who reported the gun incident. This is not only a potential breach of ethics, depending on if the school has a code of ethics in place or not, but it is also negligent and could put Max's life at risk. And I say he put Max's life in danger because we see how violent he gets in this interaction. He's pissed and he's out for blood because Max dared to speak up and say something, even as he knows for a fact that what she said really has no effect on him because his family status in the community protects him. Though, as we'll see later on, Nathan has a lot of serious mental health issues that likely contributed to his reaction here. Just as Nathan is getting violent, a pickup truck driven by the girl that he'd been threatening in the bathroom shows up, and Max winds up climbing in and fleeing with the girl, who turns out to be her old BFF Chloe, as Nathan and Warren duke it out. As they talk and drive, we find out that Max's camera was damaged in the scuffle, and we wind up back at Chloe's house, searching for and acquiring some tools to attempt a repair. In the process of searching for the tools, though, it's revealed that Chloe's stepdad is none other than the security guard at Blackwell, and my, what a small world we live in. He's apparently really into surveillance as well, with cameras all over the house and plans to put them up in Blackwell. But that's something that will come into play later on. That isn't the only revelation here, as we also find out that Chloe is intimately tied to a girl who went missing a few months before Max arrived, Rachel Amber. Rachel apparently took Max's place in Chloe's life after Max moved away, and while her disappearance has apparently been more or less pushed aside by most other people, Chloe hasn't stopped looking. In fact, the missing persons posters that we can find plastered around town were put up by Chloe. The camera is beyond repair, but Chloe gifts Max with a new one after finding out that it was us that saved her with the fire alarm earlier in the day. She figures it out when she sees the photo of the butterfly and puts two and two together. And let's take a second to talk about that butterfly and the symbolism here, because it's kind of fascinating. With Max's ability to change things, we get a rather unique chance to witness multiple outcomes with many different situations. Even so, those outcomes aren't always limited to just the immediate aftermath. Some of the decisions we make will have ripple effects much later on, but we don't really have any way of knowing how those actions will change things until we get to those later points. This is a situation best described through the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is a concept in something known as chaos theory, where a tiny change in the initial conditions of a complex system can lead to large, unpredictable consequences later on. The idea is commonly tied to meteorologist Edward Lorenz, though it likely predates him in various ways by centuries. Coincidentally, Lorenz came up with his version while working as a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the organization that works as the inspiration for the Commonwealth Institute of Technology in Fallout 4, and giving these games a tiny thread to link them. Essentially, he'd been working on a weather simulation and wound up rounding one of the values he was using down from 0.506127 to just 0.506. This tiny change wound up giving him a completely different result in the simulation and led to further research and an eventual talk he would give titled Predictability: Does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? Very broadly, the concept explores the idea that an event as small as a butterfly flapping its wings could cause a ripple effect in air currents that could eventually lead to a tornado on the other side of the world. This is an overgeneralization, but essentially the idea boils down to tiny changes in the initial conditions leading to drastically different outcomes. So, for instance, Max deciding to talk to someone or to intervene or not intervene in a situation could lead to a later outcome that varies greatly from the outcome that would have happened if she'd only done the opposite. This will be easier to explore later on, but it's important to understand now because we need to be thinking about how our choices will impact the world, both in the game and in real life. As we go about our day-to-day lives, most of us don't really give much thought to how the little actions we take impact the world at large. It's easy to get wrapped up in the idea that nothing we do really matters that much outside of our little slice of the world, but it isn't really the case. You never know how your actions will impact others, how that warm greeting might just lift someone's day, or how the words you use could affect a random stranger. Maybe someone is having an awful day. They just lost someone or things have been going wrong in their life in general. And their interaction with you winds up driving a change that alters their life and potentially the lives of many others. Let's say you do something like swear at them or cut them off in traffic, and that little action ripples, making their day worse. Instead of going to some place that they were going to go, like work, school, the grocery store, or a friend's house, they wind up going home. If they had gone to that original destination, they would have met someone who would have wound up being their soulmate, the person that they would eventually marry and have children with. One of those children would have wound up being the scientist that provided the research needed to cure some horrible disease. But because the initial conditions were what they were, that kid never existed. Now, to be fair and level, the initial conditions could have been anything, including something seemingly bad at the time, and the end result could have been positive or negative, regardless of the positive or negative initial conditions. But that's also why even making the decisions we think are the most ethical as Max isn't necessarily the right thing. I usually advocate for things like utilitarianism when playing these kind of games or making decisions in the real world. But chaos theory and the butterfly effect concept throws all of that out the window because there's no way to predict what's going to happen. And that's why there's no good answer to whether or not we should remain in the closet in Chloe's room when her stepdad comes in to yell at her. That's the next big decision that we have to make. And I wound up staying in the closet because she said the situation would be worse if he found us in her room. But was that the right move? And that's where we find the danger of Max's rewind and the problem of overthinking these things based on the potential outcomes. I could rewind and come out to try to help Chloe, but there's no way to know if that's going to be the best thing to do either. In reality, the best we can do is read the situation and focus on the immediate outcome and the things that are in our control. So that's what we're going to do as we continue to unravel the story of Max, Chloe, and Arcadia Bay. It's tempting to try and figure out what the long-term consequences of our actions will be, but guessing and trying to make every decision based on a wide range of possible futures won't help us. If all we do is rewind every single interaction and try to make the best possible decision, we'll never get anywhere. We wrap up episode 1 with Max telling Chloe about her ability and suffering another vision of the storm, with this dive into the strange possible dream giving us a date that is apparently only a few days away and making us wonder how much of this is a dream and how much could be a premonition. Snowflakes falling don't really help make things any clearer, as it doesn't typically snow in the Pacific Northwest in October. But we'll have to leave that discussion for the next episode. Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the choices in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're exploring our newfound power over time with Max and Chloe in Life is Strange Chapter 2. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. After ending Episode 1 with unexpected snow flurries, we find Max waking up the next morning to a text from Chloe, asking us to meet her at the diner in 40 minutes. We run into Kate in the shower room, and she asks us to return a book to her after letting us know how thankful she is for our intervention with David the day before. And, after a quick shower, we have our first big decision of the episode. Well, it kind of spirals into two big decisions. It turns out Kate's recent melancholy is related to a video that has been circulating for a couple of weeks that shows her doing some very wild things at a Vortex Club party. Victoria plasters the link to the video on the bathroom mirror while we're in the shower, and we have to decide to either leave it up or wipe it away before leaving the room. And the choice here seems pretty obvious. To be honest, this is one of those things that deserves a closer look and a couple of callouts, because the way these kids are acting isn't much different from the way a lot of teens in the real world act at times. I talked a bit in the last episode about high school and how each of us has our own perspective on that transformative time in our lives. But for some people, that stretch of adolescence can be a nightmare. Kids are ruthless, with many not knowing where to draw the line when it comes to what they see as harmless jokes. They will make fun of each other and tear each other down just to get a few laughs. And once someone becomes the center of attention, it can be almost impossible to get away from that spotlight. In this instance, Kate has been made fun of for a while for her religious beliefs, though she has been able to more or less handle most of that and continue to be her true self up to this point. For one reason or another, she decided to attend a Vortex Club party where, as we'll soon find out, she was drugged and wound up doing things she wouldn't normally do. These actions would be caught on camera, with the video being shared and causing people to start calling her names and saying that she's a hypocrite for all of her talk about being abstinent. First things first, as obviously wrong as the drugging is, the people who took and shared the video are almost worse in the overall picture. They made the conscious decision to pull out their phones when they saw one of their classmates acting odd, and then chose to share the video out as a way to tear down another human being. There is no scenario where that action is even remotely okay. But it isn't something that's confined to the game. We live in a world that exists almost more online than off, and videos of people doing crazy or irresponsible things go viral all the time. The first thing most people do when they see something unexpected happening is pull out their phone and start recording, even in situations where they should be helping someone rather than filming them. If someone would have stepped in and helped Kate, pulled her out of an obviously bad situation instead of recording her transgressions and posting them for all to see, things might have turned out much differently than they do at the end of the episode. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. After wiping the mirror clean, we head back to Max's room and discover that Victoria isn't the only one who enjoys writing things on walls. Nathan Prescott is still angry that we told on him for having a gun in the bathroom, and he apparently broke into our room to make his displeasure known. This is yet more evidence of how unhinged and juvenile he is, but it's also something that we'll have to deal with later as we still have to return Kate's book to her and head out to see Chloe. And returning Kate's book is where we face the second big choice of the episode, as she explains what happened at the party and asks us whether we think she should go to the police. Before we make that choice, I want to point out something that really makes my blood boil about this situation. Kate mentions that she's worried about people in her church seeing the video, because she knows how they'll react when they see it, and she doesn't want to bear that kind of shame. And that kind of thing is just so wrong. She shouldn't need to worry like that. And the fact that she does tells us a lot about her church and the people in it. Religion doesn't come up often in these videos, as I don't have a ton of reason to talk about it. But in this instance, it is kind of important to bring up. As someone who was raised in a pretty fundamentalist church, I can understand why Kate would be worried, as, in my experience, a lot of dedicated, church-going types can be very judgy. They'll stick to their holier-than-thou ideas and act like they are better than others despite the teachings their church might espouse. Now, to be fair, this isn't all churches or even all religious-minded people. But there are a lot of people out there that would shame Kate for her actions and even blame her for what happened. They might say she shouldn't have gone to the party in the first place, that she quote-unquote got what she deserved for hanging out with the wrong crowd. Those people are demonstrably, categorically wrong in every way. Kate is a victim in this instance, and she does not deserve what happened to her. It does not matter what she was wearing, how she was acting, or who she was hanging out with. No one should ever be shamed for being the victim of a crime, and if the people in her church are the kind that would do that, then she needs to find a better church. Now, that being said, I also need to point out the horrible writing that comes with the decision Kate asked us to help her with, and the way it relates to the world that we know. The right answer should be to go to the police, but all too often the police aren't able to help much in these kind of situations. The legal system is set up in such a way that you need proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which protects the innocent, but also allows the guilty to walk free in instances where that kind of proof is so hard to get. In this situation, we can know with a high degree of certainty that Nathan Prescott likely drugged and did something to Kate. But there is no hard evidence of that, meaning that even if the authorities took her claims seriously, he would likely never face any real consequences. It's a catch-22 for victims because seeking the help they need means being subjected to further violations despite the low chance of any kind of justice being dealt out. But not seeking help means dealing with the trauma that they've gone through basically on their own. There's no good answer here, but the best possible thing we could do is to look for proof and to be the best possible friend to Kate that we can be. But that's where the writing here is probably the worst we've seen to this point in the game, as choosing that option leans into blaming the victim. Where we should be reassuring Kate and standing by her side, we instead tell her that no one will believe her and that she should just stay quiet and hope for the best. This was probably the closest I've come so far to quitting the game and walking away, because it is just such a bad way to frame things. Going to the police might not get Kate justice or be the best choice, but there are other options out there for victims of this kind of crime, and we should have had the chance to help Kate in other ways. And in case you or someone you know has gone through or is going through something similar, I'll share a link below to resources that can help. It's important to reach out to someone that you can trust and have people there to just listen, if nothing else, because you shouldn't have to go through these kind of things alone. Moving on, we head out of the dorm and make our way to meet Chloe at the Two Whales Diner, a diner her mom, Joyce, has been working at for years apparently. And though Chloe is running late, Joyce is there to greet us with coffee and conversation. And that conversation turns quickly to the events of the prior day, where Chloe's stepfather berated her and hit her as we hid in the closet. Joyce defends David's actions, but in reality there is no real defense for him. We'll be talking more about David when the time comes, but for now we'll just leave it at that. Chloe finally arrives and she's excited to talk about Max's power to rewind time, being the only other person that Max has told about the ability. She decides to test the rewind power, and the first thing we have to do is tell her what is in her pockets. After looking at the contents and rewinding time, of course. I didn't pay very close attention, but somehow I still managed to get everything right. But that one little test wasn't quite enough, and Max has to predict everything that's going to happen in the diner in the next couple of minutes before Chloe finally buys that the power is real without any doubts. This is smart on Chloe's part, as she's doing her due diligence before believing something so extraordinary, and we could all learn a thing or two from her. But that level of skepticism is about the brightest idea Chloe has here, as she insists on using the power to have some fun as soon as she's sure it's real. As tempting as it would be to use a power like that in many different circumstances, it wouldn't be smart to play around with it. For one thing, without knowing more about how it works, there could be unforeseen consequences that you would want to avoid. Maybe the rewind only affects the world around Max, leaving her untouched. As unimportant as that sounds, she could find out that rewinding leaves her aging while others go backward and make for some really awkward issues when she's 20 years older than she should be in everyone else's eyes. There could also be other impacts to her health or to the world around her that she just hasn't seen yet. Taking the risk of using the power on a consistent basis without knowing the cost is a really bad idea. She also has no idea if the power she has is permanent or some kind of weird fluke. It could just stop working at random, leaving her stuck with whatever choice she made last, even as she assumed that she would have the ability to rewind. And that's one big reason they shouldn't be testing it, or even really using it. Without any rhyme or reason to the power, and without knowing its limitations or even how long it will last, Max could become dependent on it and use it as a crutch so she doesn't ever have to improve herself or even really try to get things right. Then, if it just goes away as quick as it came, she would be stuck in whatever position she'd put herself in with no way to undo things. A good case in point involves the test that Chloe sets up next. The pair head to Chloe's hangout spot, an old junkyard outside of town full of scrapped cars and years of trash. Chloe has Max gather some bottles so they can set up a shooting range to use the gun that she stole from her stepdad to test the rewind ability. This whole thing is really a way for Max to get a little more insight into the relationship between Chloe and Rachel, with a big area set aside to show us what their relationship was like, but for now, that's not really important. After gathering some bottles, Chloe proceeds to shoot a couple of them before pushing Max to give her some ideas for trick shots. There are several options to pick from, but there's one in particular that highlights my point about the risk. If Max tells Chloe to shoot the bumper of the car above the bottles, the bullet will ricochet back and hit Chloe in the chest, causing her to collapse to her knees and possibly killing her if Max isn't able to rewind. If her ability had chosen that moment to fail, Chloe would be dead. As it is, we are able to rewind and the moment is seemingly forgotten, though it really shouldn't be. Max should have stopped things and told Chloe what happened, pointed out the risk that they were taking, and maybe learned a lesson here. Why risk another shot causing harm that you might not be able to take back? But the possibility of losing her powers isn't the only problem, as the final rewind Max does here seemingly gives her a nosebleed and causes her to pass out. To be fair, there isn't anything definitively linking the bloody nose to the rewind ability, but there does seem to be a correlation between the two things, as she experienced a similar reaction when testing her powers at the diner. After a brief flash of the tornado, Max wakes up in Chloe's arms as her friend had panicked and carried her over to sit on the hood of a car until the issue passed. Just as she's recovering, a man Chloe seems to know pretty well, Frank, shows up to put a damper on the day by demanding Chloe pay some money that she owes him. As he's pulling a knife on Chloe, the pair look over to see Max pointing the gun at Frank, and we have a choice to make. We can either shoot Frank or put the gun down. Just acting on instinct, my first reaction was to pull the trigger. But that doesn't really work out very well, as the gun doesn't have any bullets loaded, and Frank is more annoyed that we tried to shoot him than anything else. As he leaves, he threatens to remember the fact that we almost shot him, and I was actually worried that decision could come back to haunt us in a bad way. So, I wound up rewinding and choosing to lower the gun. This action goes against my desire to limit the use of the rewind, but all I could think of at the time was how I wanted to minimize any future risk to either Max or Chloe, and being on the bad side of what appears to be a drug dealer doesn't seem like the best move. Of course, not even trying to shoot him leaves him walking away with Chloe's gun and potentially raising the risk in some other way later. But without some way to predict the future and having no third option, that's how I ended things. Chloe wasn't exactly thrilled, but she seemed to at least understand somewhat. And before long, the two girls were walking along the railroad tracks and chatting about the situation and life in Arcadia Bay. But even that serene moment winds up becoming way more than they expected, when Chloe's leg gets stuck in the tracks as a train barrels toward them, and Max has to work quickly to free her friend. Thankfully, and with only a couple of rewinds, I was able to get the track to open up and free Chloe just in time as we witness a reminder of why it's never a good idea to play near railroad tracks. After having enough excitement to fill the entire day over the course of one morning, Chloe drops Max off back at school, and we have the chance to walk around and chat with a few people before we have to be in class. Most of these interactions add little tidbits to the story in their own way, but one I really want to focus on is the argument we see between Kate and Mr. Jefferson. We aren't able to talk to Kate here, but we can follow up with Mr. Jefferson and find out just how much of a shitbag he truly is, as he discloses his opinion that Kate might have brought all of the bullying on herself for being the target of a viral video. He also alludes a couple of times to how Max isn't believed when she reports things, as if she's some kind of a habitual liar. Both Mr. Jefferson and the principal act like Max reporting Nathan and subsequently mentioning the confrontation she witnessed between the security guard and Kate is the final straw in some pattern that we are so far unaware of. It really makes me question if anyone in this school is competent enough to be running a facility full of teenagers, or even one for adults for that matter. But the conversation with Mr. Jefferson is cut short when he gets a phone call that is apparently more important than the concerns of his students, and we wind up making our way into the classroom in time to catch the security guard taking photos of Kate in the courtyard as she makes her way toward the dorms. Honestly, the whole situation with the teacher, the principal, and the security guard is just so over the top at this point and so frustrating to watch. None of the adults seem to know how to handle themselves, and the politics of dealing with Nathan Prescott and the Vortex Club leave me missing the simplicity of my own high school days. We barely get the chance to get into photography class though, before we have another dramatic interruption in the form of one of the other students popping in to tell us that something is going down at the girls' dorm. Based on what all has happened in this episode, I assumed there was something to do with Kate, but I wouldn't have guessed how things would play out here. It's raining, and a crowd of students has gathered in the courtyard outside of the girls' dormitory as Kate stands atop the building, threatening to jump. But it isn't a threat for long, and she leaps just as we round the corner. Turning back time only works temporarily in this situation, as we can only get her back up to the top before time starts and she jumps again. But then, something odd happens. Through what I can only assume is sheer force of will, Max is able to basically stop time in its tracks long enough to make her way to the rooftop. But the effort required to do this seems to have broken her rewind power, at least for the moment. This is the first time in the game where we have some choices to make and no way to go back and do them over, bringing to life the discussion we had earlier about what might happen if the powers just stopped working at the worst possible moment. And this could have been a great moment. A moment to show how the choices to this point mattered and how Max can actually rely on herself more than she realizes. But it kind of ruined a big portion of the game for me. See, up to now, we've had several chances to either interact with Kate and be a good friend, or ignore her. At every chance, I've taken the time to talk to her and to try to show her someone cared, including answering the phone when she called while I was out with Chloe, and talking to her in class and in the dorms. I've tried to be the best friend I could be, and now that relationship should pay off in some way. So many times we hear about people who have taken their own life, and how if there had just been someone, a friend or family member or even a stranger, who'd taken the time to reach out and talk to them, they might have made a different decision. And that could have been reinforced here, but it wasn't. The only thing that matters in this interaction with Kate is if you make the correct dialogue decisions in the moment, with those decisions being based on a close inspection of the items in her room when you go to return her book to her. And this is just absolutely the wrong message to send. Studies and reflection from people who have attempted to take their own lives show that just having someone reach out can make all the difference. For many who are contemplating the act, just knowing that there is someone who truly cares can be enough to push them to get help, to give them the will to keep going when all hope seems lost. It's not foolproof, nothing is, but the fact of the matter is that in this situation, the devs have gamified this very real issue that so many people deal with, and I'm not on board for it. This was the second time in this episode that I very nearly walked away from the game. But I'm not going to do that, because we can learn things from these writing mistakes. We can learn how important it is to check on your friends and family, to reach out to someone you think might be having a hard time, or even to someone who seems like they have it all together, and just asking, "Are you doing all right?" We can learn how to pay attention to strangers, or even acquaintances, and think about how our actions could impact them and the wider world. We can learn how something that might seem like a little joke to us could be incredibly hurtful to someone else, and make the decision to lift others up instead of tearing them down. We don't have the ability to rewind time, meaning our actions and words can't be taken back. We need to be careful with what we say and do, and think about how those things will hurt or help others around us. As if to spit in our face, the very next scene takes place in the principal's office, and we're tasked with placing the blame for what happened to Kate. We're able to rewind and put the onus on either David, Nathan, or Mr. Jefferson. And I chose to call out Jefferson for the way he reacted to Kate right before she stormed off to the roof of the dorm. But the truth is that the blame lies with every single person in that school. From the person who took and posted the video, to everyone who watched it and laughed either behind her back or to her face, to the people who made fun of her for her beliefs and way of life, all the staff that stood by as those things went on, and especially Nathan Prescott, who will get his just desserts in the end. We close out the episode on another odd occurrence as a solar eclipse takes place, and next week we'll be unearthing a lot of new information and finding out one of the biggest drawbacks to changing the past. Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're discovering the problem with changing the past in Life is Strange Episode 3. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. After losing Kate at the end of Chapter 2 and calling out Mr. Jefferson for being really bad at his job, we start Episode 3 in a more somber state. It's the middle of the night and Max has fallen asleep at her desk, though it seems to be a rather restless sleep, as a notification from her phone wakes her and gives us some insight into what she was dreaming about as she shouts Kate's name. After what happened, Max is likely suffering from PTSD, and she needs to reach out and talk to someone. No one should go through trauma like that alone. And as someone who went through counseling for PTSD and survivor's guilt following my time in Iraq, I would highly suggest seeking out a therapist or counselor if you ever go through something like this, as it really does help. The notification on Max's phone is a text from Chloe asking us to meet her outside in the quad, so that's where we head next. On the way, we find a memorial for Kate outside her room, and we have the chance to talk to Dana, who's apparently dealing with her own grief and regret for what happened. Meeting Chloe, we find out she wanted to meet us because she borrowed the keys to the school from her stepdad, David, giving us the ability to check out the school at night and snoop around a bit for any info that might be useful. The one big thing of note as we prepare to break into the school is that Victoria and Mr. Jefferson can be seen and heard leaving likely much later than they should have been there, raising all kinds of questions. From the conversation they're having, it's pretty clear that Victoria wants to do something more than just talk, but to his credit, Jefferson shuts her down. This scene, however, should not be happening. For starters, the pair of them being alone is just asking for some kind of trouble. Jefferson could pull something, or Victoria could claim something happened that didn't, and in either case, it would be his word against hers. In a perfect world, this wouldn't be an issue, but in reality, there should be a third party there to protect both of them. Especially in this situation, because while Victoria may be over 18, the age typically considered legally able to consent, he is her teacher and therefore has power over her grades. This power dynamic means that she might feel obligated to do things that she wouldn't really be willing to do under normal circumstances, or that he could feel some kind of pressure because of some perceived risk that exists if he doesn't say or do something she expects. It's a big reason why even many colleges have rules or regulations about faculty and students dating. And we see a hint of the possible problem play out as Victoria actually does threaten Jefferson. On the one hand, showing this risk and having this play out makes sense. But there is a dark side to this as well. Too often, when a woman comes forward with allegations, authorities and many others hesitate to see the report as credible because media like this tends to lean into the idea of women using false allegations as some kind of common occurrence. Movies, TV shows, books, and games make it seem like women are just going around and lying to get what they want or to get back at men all the time. But this just isn't the case. False allegations do happen, with most reliable studies on the topic showing a false allegation reporting rate between 2 and 10%, but with proper investigation, those allegations can be sussed out. The most important thing we can do, as a society and within our system of justice, is to take every allegation seriously while also adhering to the idea of innocent until proven guilty. We shouldn't just jump to conclusions either way, and we should follow the evidence to wherever it leads. After Victoria and Jefferson leave the area, Chloe and Max head into the school and make their way to the principal's office. They aren't able to locate a key to the office, but that winds up not really being a problem, as Max is able to collect some materials from the science lab and a few other places to build a small bomb to break open the door. That sounds crazy on the surface, but once the door is open, Max is able to go into the room, rewind time to before they blew it open, and unlock it from the inside. For the purposes of this video, we'll just grant that all of that makes perfect sense and has no holes in the plot whatsoever. The act of blowing the door open itself is incredibly risky, especially as only hours before Max lost her powers for a short time on the rooftop. What if that happened again as the alarm started to sound? In the principal's office, we discover a few things of note. Kate was apparently an amazing student who also volunteered with the Meals on Wheels program in the community and led a religious studies program in the school. It also seems that the principal was taking the video of Kate that had been circulating at least somewhat seriously, as he noted the video may have been taken without her knowledge or consent. There's also a note from the school nurse reporting that Kate may have experienced some recent emotional or physical trauma. There's also a letter from Sean Prescott, Nathan's father, more or less dictating to Principal Wells how to run the school. We'll file that one under the typical rich prick behavior and move on. Speaking of Nathan, we also learn that while his official record at the school is exemplary, he actually has a lot of really bad notes in an unofficial record the principal keeps. He's seen as disruptive at times, with erratic behavior patterns, though anything negative, like a strange drawing where he scrawled the words "Rachel in the dark room" over and over, is kept hidden per a letter from his father threatening to pull Nathan from Blackwell, along with the family's funding, if his demands aren't met. It's very clear that Nathan has some psychological issues and should be seeking help, and possibly medication, though his parents aren't exactly concerned with what might be going on with their son. But all of that is really just window dressing for the overall story. And the main thing I want to hone in on here is the big choice we have to make before leaving the office. In the top drawer of the principal's desk, Chloe finds an envelope labeled Handicapped Fund, containing $5,000, and we have to decide whether to let Chloe take it to pay Frank off or put it back. Under normal circumstances, the right choice is always to leave the money that doesn't belong to us, as stealing is normally wrong, morally and ethically speaking, with a few exceptions. Stealing food to feed hungry children, for instance, would be pretty easy to justify depending on the circumstances. Morality and ethics aren't a black and white topic. There's a sliding scale, and we all have to weigh our own sensibilities when it comes to right and wrong, depending on whatever factors we find ourselves facing. In this instance, I chose to keep the money based on a couple of factors. For one thing, I don't think the principal's hands are clean in the things that have been going on in the school. He's been taking what amounts to bribes from the Prescott family to keep their son squeaky clean on the official record. And something tells me that this stack of cash is part of that scheme. I really wouldn't be surprised to find out that the label of Handicapped Fund on the envelope was his way of masking some shady deal with the Prescotts or someone else. Adding to that, Chloe's life could be in danger if she isn't able to pay Frank back, meaning that money could literally save her life. And if the cash was meant for something nefarious, or was not actually being put into improving the school for handicapped students, then using it to save Chloe instead could actually be a net positive, morally speaking. Of course, it's always more complicated than that, which is why I encourage you to go into the comments and share your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree with the decision to take the money? Why? All I ask is that you remain respectful with each other when debating and always focus on the ideas and concepts over trying to tear each other down. Disagreeing is okay. Resorting to ad hominem attacks isn't. Max and Chloe wind up sneaking into the pool after they finished up in the principal's office, experiencing a close call with security before heading back to Chloe's house. After breakfast the next morning, Max snoops around in David's laptop as they've started to suspect he's somehow tied to Rachel's disappearance. And it would seem David is kind of a stalker. He's suspicious of everyone and has some wild privacy invasion issues, and he blames his time in the military for the way he is with no apologies. That, especially, is one of my pet peeves, because while being in the military and being deployed to a combat zone can lead to a lot of mental health issues, there are a lot of resources out there for people like David to get help to work through those things. If he's aware enough to point out the fact that he's always on edge because of his time in the service, he should be aware enough to know that those feelings aren't normal, and he should know to seek out help. Chloe, her mom, and Max wind up confronting David about his activities, and while it does potentially seem like he's hiding some good reason for his spying on Kate and the others, he refuses to elaborate and even resorts to blatant sexism before being kicked out of the house by Joyce. Once that's been dealt with, Chloe and Max head over to the diner to borrow the keys to Frank's RV and snoop around for clues to Rachel's disappearance. But instead of implicating Frank in the possible crime, Max finds evidence that Rachel and Frank were a couple. This hits Chloe pretty hard, as she doesn't believe that Rachel could have been lying to her. The revelation opens old wounds, and during a conversation in Chloe's truck after leaving the RV, we learn that she has a lot of grief around her dad's passing that she hasn't worked through. She blames her dad for walking out the door on the day that he got in the accident. She says that she feels like he actively chose to leave her. While this feeling doesn't make a lot of sense logically, it is a perfectly normal feeling for someone who's lost a loved one in such a tragic way. One of the quirks we experience as humans is this innate desire to have some kind of meaning or driving force behind everything that happens. It's the feeling that pushes us to accept wild conspiracy theories, and it's the force that tells us that people we cared about couldn't have just died as a matter of normal life. There has to be some rhyme or reason to the madness. Otherwise, it's all just chaos. In Chloe's mind, her father should have known what would happen and should have chosen to stay home instead of leaving that day. She even reveals that her mother feels the same way, as she was the one who'd called to ask him to pick her up from work. If she hadn't asked for a ride, he would still be alive. But while that may be technically the case, it isn't actually Joyce's fault, or Chloe's fault, or anyone else's for that matter. Every event that happens builds off of every other event that came before it, and we have no way to predict what will happen as the result of any one decision. If Chloe or Joyce would have known William was going to be involved in a wreck that killed him, it might make some sense to blame themselves for not stopping it. But as it is, they had no way of knowing what would happen and no way to prevent it because foresight is foggy, hindsight is 20/20, and you can't change the past. But if you could change it, would you? If you could go back and change something like a loved one passing away from a preventable accident or error, would that be something you should do? Max is faced with that very question as we walk into the last moments of this episode. Back in her dorm, she picks up a photo of her and Chloe that Joyce had given her that morning. The photo just so happens to be the very last photo William had taken, with the shutter being pressed just moments before he walked out the door. As she stares at it, the world around her begins to vibrate and fade in and out. And before she knows what's happening, she finds herself standing next to Chloe as William snaps the shot of the girls. Max is about as confused as anyone would be, being pulled 5 years into the past, but after taking a couple of minutes to adjust, she settles in and decides that things are going to be different this time. As Joyce calls, Max finds and hides William's car keys, preventing him from taking his preordained final drive. With no way to drive himself, William resorts to taking the bus, and the disaster that ruined Chloe's life is averted. But there are consequences. Flashing back into what we know as the present day, Max finds herself back at Blackwell, sitting in the main yard in front of the school, hanging out with Victoria and the Vortex Club? It's clear something is very wrong, but the extent of the damage isn't completely clear at first. Jumping on the bus, Max makes her way to Chloe's house to check on her friend. Along the way, we discover another anomaly in the natural world, though this one doesn't involve weird weather or celestial bodies. Instead, it appears whales are dying en masse and washing up on the shore of Arcadia Bay. That might normally take the spotlight, but it's actually overshadowed when Max arrives at Chloe's house to discover her best friend is in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the neck down and looking nothing like the Chloe we've come to know. The story of what happened to her will be coming next week, though. Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're fixing what we broke the last time in Life is Strange Episode 4. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. At the end of the last episode, we found out that going back in time and righting the perceived wrong of Chloe's dad dying had some unintended consequences. The biggest of these appears to be that Chloe herself suffered some kind of accident instead. We'll find out through conversation that she wound up getting a car from her parents for her birthday, and an SUV ran her off the road, crashing her car into a ditch and snapping her neck. She's been paralyzed from the neck down ever since. But things only get worse from there. Chloe's parents have taken on massive amounts of debt to ensure that she can be taken care of, and they're unable to focus on anything outside of her care. This has brought an immense amount of guilt onto her shoulders, and she really wants Max to focus on anything other than her physical state or the accident. She mentions how she gets enough of people feeling sorry for her, and she just wants to have one semi-normal day with Max. Back at the house, we can see the special room they put together for her, with a medical bed and equipment to help move her around and take care of her. It's a lot different from the room upstairs that we spent time in earlier. During the conversation about the medical bills, we can find our first real moment that lines up with the real world, something that gets a lot of talk in the United States in particular. Chloe mentions that her medical bills are costing her parents somewhere in the ballpark of $1 million a year. A truth that many people in the real world live through every day. It's something that I could go on and on about, and a topic that's been covered by people way more qualified than I am to discuss the state of the medical system we live with. From an ethical and moral standpoint, I'll just say one thing before moving on. No one should ever be crushed under medical debt, and there is absolutely no reason that we should have to settle for a system where people would need to choose between medical care and keeping a roof over their head or food on the table. The fact that anyone in the world that we live in would ever be turned down for care or saddled with so much debt they'll never be able to pay it off because of an injury or illness is pathetic And we need to do better. There are thousands of families like Chloe's in our world, and we need to step up and do the right thing by them, because that could easily be any of us. Diseases like cancer don't discriminate, and accidents can happen out of the blue to anyone at any time. With that out of the way, we can focus on what might be one of the most difficult and controversial decisions in this episode, and possibly in the series in general. See, Chloe isn't getting any better, and she isn't even staying stable. Her respiratory system is shutting down, and all the machines and equipment keeping her alive and driving her parents further into debt are more or less just prolonging what is going to be an incredibly short and miserable life for her. After a movie night and a short conversation the next morning, Chloe asks Max to get her pain medicine out of the cabinet upstairs. On the way to do that, we can have conversations with both Joyce and William and explore some of the notes and letters around the house detailing the family's dire financial situation and Chloe's worsening condition. One other thing of note that we can find, though, pertains directly to the choice that we made to take the supposed handicapped fund from the principal's office in the last episode. There is a letter among Chloe's school stuff from Principal Wells apologizing for the school not having the proper facilities, mainly in the form of wheelchair ramps. In the letter, he blames federal cuts in education and the fact that the school was built prior to 1977 for the lack of proper renovations, and says that they'll just have to keep working on private funding to maybe someday be able to facilitate students like Chloe. For starters, if Chloe's last name was Prescott, I'm sure the school would be able to find the funds with no issue. But worse yet is the fact that they obviously had some decent donations being made to the Handicapped Fund and still seem to be short for making the environment more inclusive. But that's not all, because while he blames federal funding, Blackwell is a private school, meaning that most of their funding would come from donors and private tuition anyway, not federal funds. While cuts to federal funding could impact their ability to provide some amenities and services, the fact that basic things like wheelchair ramps haven't been built makes it seem like they aren't exactly using the stacks of cash lying around for their supposed purpose. Obviously, a lot of this is circumstantial, but we've seen the principal's bias in favor of students like Nathan, and it isn't a big leap to imagine that he's embezzling or misusing funds in some way. But all of that pales next to the massive choice that we're presented with as Chloe and Max are reminiscing over some old photos. Chloe is aware of her condition and how much worse it's been getting, and she doesn't like the idea of leaving her parents more in debt just to prolong her life for maybe a few more months, where she'll just be mostly bedridden and wasting away more and more. She wants to end things in a more dignified way, if such a thing is possible, and she wants to go out on her own terms. She's enjoyed the day that she got to spend with Max, and she wants that day to be her final memory. She wants Max to turn up the morphine drip and let her fade off into a forever sleep. So, this gets really into some deep stuff, and it's worth spending a little time on from multiple angles. What Chloe is asking for is really something known as death with dignity. As simply and straightforward as I can make it, death with dignity allows people who are terminally ill to end their own lives in a humane way on their own terms. It isn't something that is legal in many places, but in Chloe's case, Oregon actually has a law on the books called the Death with Dignity Act that was passed in 1997 and allows for her to make this choice. It would require a medical sign-off and a specific medication to be used, but it is something that she could and should be allowed to consider. I say should because each and every one of us should have the option to avoid the pain and suffering that comes with some of the worst kind of illnesses and injuries. If someone knows that they only have a few months to live, and that those few months will be filled with horrible pain or the inability to do things for themselves or be happy, they should be allowed to make a choice to end their lives on their own terms. Like the discussion about medical bills and the healthcare system from earlier, this just seems like common sense. But it gets a little complicated thanks to the living. Human beings are a social species, and we have a very difficult time dealing with the loss of those that we love and care for as a general rule. Many of us, if given the option, would choose to keep a loved one around on life support if there was even a small chance that they would recover, rather than letting them go. And someone on life support isn't even responsive normally. If someone who is wide awake and still able to have conversations says that they want their life to end because they are in pain and have no real chance to ever recover, most people would beg them to reconsider rather than honor that wish. This is, at its core, a very selfish desire, but also a very natural one. We value life in its purest form, and we don't want to see it end. We also tend to grab onto any sliver of hope and hang on for dear life, making it even harder emotionally when that hope slips away and the person we love passes. That's a big part of why death with dignity is a controversial topic. We tend to see someone wanting to end their life as giving up hope, even when that hope is more false than real. We might even tell ourselves that we would never consider such a thing, that the suffering would be worth it just to see one additional sunrise or spend one more moment with our loved ones. But the reality is that we can't know what we would do or what we would want until we find ourselves in that situation. When the pain is unbearable, when the medicine is making life worse, when we have to rely on others to clean us up and feed us through a tube. This is personal to me because my great-uncle was one of those people who would have benefited from a death with dignity law. He spent his life as a firefighter. He was a big, strong man who it seemed would live forever. The last year of his life saw him going through more pain and suffering than anyone should have to endure. Nurses were in and out at all hours, helping to keep him comfortable as he just waited for the end and lost strength with each passing day. When my aunt asked him what she could do for him, he begged her to hand him one of his guns so he wouldn't need to go on suffering. She couldn't bring herself to do it, and even if she had, she would likely have wound up in jail for helping him. He eventually passed away after a little over a year of being stuck in bed. No one should have to suffer that way if they would rather end it. But no loved one should have to assist in the act either, though that is what Chloe asks of Max. This request is unthinkable, and if it were a real situation, I wouldn't fault Max for being unable to go through with helping Chloe. The emotional toll doing something like that would bring would be a heavy burden, not to mention the possible legal ramifications. Max would most certainly wind up going to jail for the act, especially as the only proof that she would have that Chloe wanted her to do it would be her word. Joyce and William wouldn't accept that Chloe wanted to die, and they would likely want to pursue charges against Max even if the state didn't. But the game doesn't give us the option to help Chloe pursue the legal death with dignity route, where we could potentially spend time helping her convince her parents that it was for the best and moving forward with medical assistance. Instead, we have to decide to either turn up the morphine or refuse to honor Chloe's wishes. Given the circumstances, I chose to help her. One thing I especially didn't like here, though, is that if you choose "I don't know" to give yourself more time to think it through, she compares what Chloe is asking to what Kate did, and there is no comparison to be made there. Kate's decision to jump off the roof was tied directly to her mental health and some emotional and physical trauma she had gone through. If she had decided not to jump, she could seek help and eventually work through things and live a full, healthy life. Chloe is dying, with her body slowly shutting down, and she has no real chance of ever getting any better. She'll spend whatever time she has left waiting on her body to finally give out. She'll be alive, but she won't be living. It's another one of those moments where the writers just completely failed to convey any sense that they thought any of this through. And I almost feel like they were more focused on providing an emotional gut punch than actually exploring a complex and sensitive topic. But, like many of the other decisions the game offers, this one falls flat because within moments we're using the photo that got us into this mess to go back and let William walk out the door with his car keys, setting the timeline back to where we were and leaving us with nothing but emotional scars. Back in Chloe's room, in what is the normal timeline, we find ourselves working through the clues that we've gathered to this point and finding some new information in David's office. Most of that info will have to wait though, as we need all the possible evidence of what happened to Rachel Amber before we can start really digging in. That's right, I know it is probably easy to forget, but we're still working on figuring out what happened to Chloe's ex-girlfriend? Best friend? The girl that Chloe replaced Max with. I'm going to breeze through a lot of things here because while they are kind of important in the course of the story, there isn't really a lot to talk about. Chloe and Max go back to Blackwell and break into Nathan's dorm room, where we learn a little bit more about the relationship between him and his parents, find some photos of Chloe that he definitely shouldn't have, and discover his secret drug dealer phone taped to the back of the couch. On the way out, we actually run into Nathan, who isn't particularly happy to see Max and Chloe in his building. This might be an issue, except that Warren steps in to save the day once more, beating the crap out of Nathan this time. We can stop him, or even watch it and then rewind and stop him, but honestly, seeing Nathan get a little taste of his own medicine is kind of cathartic. From there, we take a trip to the beach to visit Frank, because we need a code to help decipher the book that we lifted from him in the last episode. And the visit didn't go very smooth for me. I wound up having to rewind a couple of times because Chloe got mouthy with him, his dog got violent, guns were pulled, and I just kept picking the wrong dialogue options. I finally ended up with a compromise where Chloe shot him in the leg and he gave us the code. I was honestly just too annoyed with the conversation at that point to try for anything better, and I wanted to carry on with the story. Back in Chloe's room, we piece together the clues that we've managed to gather and come up with a likely location that Rachel would have been taken on the night that she disappeared. This whole sequence was both infuriating and satisfying, as I took way too long to figure out the clues, though that's more on me than on the game. In the end, the clues point to Rachel being taken to some creepy barn in the middle of nowhere. And after a short drive, we find ourselves standing in what I can only imagine is ground zero for dozens of murders. Breaking in was easy. Advancing the story wasn't. Long story short, there is a puzzle to solve here, as there appears to be some kind of door hidden under the hay scattered on the floor of the barn. The door is locked and can't be opened by simply pulling on it. Instead, needing us to figure out how to connect a rope between the door and a heavy piece of machinery that's up in the rafters, using the machine to provide the leverage that we need to open the door by pushing it off and letting gravity do the work. That wasn't too difficult overall, except for the bug that almost prevented me from being able to even finish the playthrough. See, when you push the machine off, you're supposed to then climb back down out of the rafters to trigger the next cutscene and advance the plot. But in my case, I was teleported down to the ground level instead, locking me out of the trigger and making it impossible to advance. I had to reload and do the whole thing over several times before I finally got it to work as intended. For those who might find themselves in the same situation, it helps to have Chloe hook the rope up to the door when you're up on top already. I also pushed the machine off first, then rewound and had Chloe attach the rope, and then pushed the machine off again, which seemed to break me out of the loop. With that out of the way, we find ourselves facing a keypad and a large door. There's no indication whatsoever of what the code for the door is, but in a moment of what I can only assume was once-in-a-lifetime brilliance, I somehow remembered a code written in red on top of one of the papers that I'd seen when inspecting the clues in Chloe's room. Blindly typing in a code that I was sure would be wrong, I was surprised to see the light turn green and the door open up. I'd love to just take that win and call it a day, but this secret room winds up blowing the whole mystery wide open. It turns out this is a secret lair called the Dark Room, where someone, likely Nathan Prescott and maybe an accomplice, has been taking girls for extremely creepy photo shoots. There are pictures of Kate and dozens of folders containing photos of other young women, including Rachel Amber. The photos of Rachel seem to point to a location Chloe recognizes as the junkyard the girls used to hang out in, and after rushing to the scene, we discover a shallow grave that contains human remains. It would seem we've discovered what happened to at least one of the victims of Nathan. But things aren't that simple, because there is a Vortex Club party getting ready to kick off, and it's likely that Nathan is planning to kill again, taking someone from the party back to the dark room at the first opportunity. Making our way there, we stop for a selfie with Warren that will come in handy at a later time, before heading inside to look for Nathan and Victoria, who it seems may be destined for a date with the dark room. I took the time to warn her of the danger, for whatever good it might do, and stuck around just long enough to hear Victoria named as the winner of the photo contest that I'd honestly forgotten was even a thing. Nathan was nowhere to be found within the walls of the pool house party, but it isn't long before we have a clue as to where he's gone, as he texts Chloe to let her know that he's waiting for us right back at the junkyard. Like a couple of amateurs, Chloe and Max let their guard down and wind up being ambushed, with Max being drugged before watching Chloe get shot. Max is expecting to see Nathan staring down at her as she lays in the dirt and tries to rewind, but instead, we're greeted by the face of Mr. Jefferson, and the episode ends just as things are heating up. Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're closing the time loop in the final chapter of Life is Strange Season 1. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. The final episode of Life is Strange Season 1 picks up shortly after the end of the previous episode and brings Max into the dark room, face to face with the actual villain of the story, Mr. Jefferson. She's tied to a chair, and Victoria is lying a few feet away, unconscious. I have to be completely honest here. This is really the part where the game just jumped the shark for me, and there isn't a whole lot I'm going to be able to discuss when it comes to these opening scenes. Jefferson seemed like a suspicious jerk to me from the first time I saw him, but he's just so over-the-top evil in this stretch that I had to question what the game was trying to accomplish while checking myself for whiplash. We'll find out later that Nathan was responsible for Rachel Amber and what ultimately happened to Kate, with Jefferson more or less acting as a role model for the younger man. But now we're supposed to believe that Mr. Jefferson has gone from simply kidnapping and photographing girls to killing people in a spree situation? Max is able to use a couple of photos to rewind time, taking herself to an earlier moment in the room before finally getting a glimpse of the selfie from the first episode. The one that she took in the classroom before all of this craziness with the time travel started. And we're going back to the beginning to nab him before this whole thing really kicked off. When playing through this for the first time, I was under the impression that this would be the ultimate end. Max is able to message David and let him know who the bad guy is, and we're able to make sure that Kate knows that she has friends that can help her through what she's dealing with. In reality, that should have been that. We're even able to stand up to Victoria and open her eyes to the damage that she's doing to others, while putting Jefferson on notice as we hand in Max's entry for the Everyday Heroes contest. By the end of the fast-forwarded week, Jefferson and Nathan have been nabbed, with Chloe's life being saved in the process. Max won the contest, and we find ourselves on a plane headed to San Francisco with Principal Wells. I thought this was the end of a short finale episode, where we wrapped up everything in a nice bow and learned a lesson about being more assertive and being a better friend along the way. Boy, was I wrong. Max gets a phone call from Chloe while mingling at the art show in San Francisco, with her friend panicking as a massive storm barrels into Arcadia Bay. It turns out the vision of the tornado that Max had to start this whole thing is coming true, and now Chloe is going to die along with the whole town if Max doesn't do something. Using her photo in the exhibit, Max goes back in time once more, altering time by destroying her prize-winning photo and landing herself back in the dark room with Jefferson yet again. Is your head hurting from all of this time travel stuff? Because mine sure is. To make matters worse, getting out of this new situation is a little more complicated because you have to choose just the right words with Jefferson, especially since there are no more photos to use for time travel, since Jefferson apparently destroyed Max's journal and all of her photos with it. I spent way too long trying to piece together what I needed to say, and then trying to figure out what to do when David showed up to rescue me, and I was just begging for the game to end by the time I'd gotten free. Before tracking down Warren so we can get the photo that he took of us at the Vortex Club party, you remember the brief moment where he stopped us for a conveniently timed selfie? We have the chance to make amends with David for misjudging him in all the timelines, and we have the first real ethical dilemma of the episode. Well, as ethical as we can get in a world where our choices are reversible and have no real consequences to speak of. Max tells David that Jefferson shot Chloe in the junkyard, because that apparently happened in this timeline as well. And David pulls out his gun and caps Jefferson then and there. Here's the deal. Normally, shooting an unconscious, restrained man would be ethically dubious at best. By most measures, he should face some kind of trial that would result in a jail sentence and yada yada yada. However, in this circumstance, we know for a fact all the things he has done, and we know that there is likely no stopping him from committing future crimes of this nature should he be given even half a chance. Something I haven't talked about much here on the channel is the criminal justice system, or at least the idea of actual justice. See, justice means that the person or people who were wronged are made whole. This might mean some kind of monetary compensation or other kind of correction, and is rarely actually possible in the system we have. What we think of as justice is actually retribution or vengeance. It's the old idea of an eye for an eye. If someone does something wrong, breaks a law or accepted norm, they incur what we consider a debt to society. That debt to society might be considered paid through a jail sentence or other means, but it rarely, if ever, makes the person or persons who were actually harmed whole again. This system can make some sense in a way, as the idea of being penalized might deter some people from committing crimes or perpetrating harm, but it is far from perfect, and it doesn't actually work as intended most of the time. In an ideal system, we would focus on fixing the root causes of specific crimes and provide actual rehabilitation for those who break the rules so they can remain as productive members of society. That being said, some people just do not play well with others. people like Jefferson. He doesn't care about anyone other than himself, and there is likely no rehabilitation in the world that will make it safe to have him walking about in society. The crimes he's committed, the things he's done, cannot be made up for. The people he's hurt can never be made whole with any kind of justice or payback. And in order to prevent him from hurting others in the future, there is only one solution. Now, it does get a little complicated here because David could face legal consequences and will likely live with some kind of emotional trauma from the whole ordeal in general. But I wasn't about to rewind time again just to save Jefferson. Leaving the dark room, we're able to track down Warren in town at the Two Whales Diner. And while there were a ton of chances to help people along the way, I wound up pushing through and just making my way to the diner because at this point in the story, it just seems like nothing really matters. Max has gone back and forth in time so many times that I can't even tell when a moment matters and when it's just something to throw away and do over. Everyone in this town is understandably freaking out, but with how slowly the storm, or at least the tornado, seems to be moving, it seems crazy that they weren't all able to get out or take proper shelter. Even the people in the diner, Warren, Joyce, and Frank, among others, seem more or less just chill with the idea that a tornado is bearing down on them. They aren't trying to get underground or to flee, and I have to question if they even want to survive the storm at this point. And this is also where we get the first hint of something that will take up the majority of the rest of the episode and make me pull what little hair I have left out. We have the chance to tell Warren that Max started the storm and what the actual This game has really thrown me for a loop in a million different ways. But now we have to jump into the real meat and potatoes because I've just about had it. The idea here is that saving Chloe in the very beginning was the catalyst for the storm because of something to do with cause and effect or chaos theory, as Warren so eloquently explains to us. It feels like something that was just shoehorned in as a way to pretend that any of the choices that we've made to this point have mattered in any way. And as far as I'm concerned, the devs can take the poorly written, so many plot lines you can barely keep up, story, and get out of town. So far, we've had the fish out of water trope, with Max in a new school and trying to find a social group to fit into, a long-neglected but rekindled friendship between childhood best friends, a time travel storyline where we have the chance to change decisions and do things over to our heart's content, except for when it mattered with Kate, an abusive stepfather who is also dealing with unresolved PTSD, and the tendency to dig into conspiracy-level stuff with a fine-tooth comb while still missing the obvious clues. A teacher who's paired up with a student who just happens to be a member of the family that runs the town to carry out atrocious acts. An alcoholic principal who might or might not be embezzling money from the school. A photography contest that we don't even have the option to do anything with on the first go-round. And an untold number of other subplots that I can't even keep up with. And now, we apparently have control of the weather, because the writers took the concept of the butterfly effect too literally. After giving Warren a goodbye kiss and going back to the night of the party, Max has to convince Chloe to help her take down Jefferson through yet another time travel mission. And after a brief photo montage, we find ourselves on the beach next to Chloe, watching a tornado inch toward Arcadia Bay. After a brief discussion with Chloe, where it's insinuated that Rachel Amber had something to do with the whole adventure, the pair of girls start heading for the lighthouse. But Max barely makes it a few steps before she passes out, and now we enter the guilt trip dream portion of the game, and I'm just going to skip right over all of it. This was the most infuriating part of the episode for me, because in my eyes, it didn't add anything at all to the narrative. We rehashed some of the prior choices, and laid out a basic canon timeline, and Max reinforced to herself that she was somehow responsible for all of the chaos because she used her powers that she didn't ask for and wasn't given any rules for. Seriously, Max was handed these powers after having what amounted to a weird dream in her art class, and the whole thing was presented as a way to save someone's life. She did what any rational, caring person would do and saved Chloe's life in the bathroom before going on to use what seemed like a random gift. And the thing is, if she hadn't saved Chloe, if she'd let Nathan shoot her, Nathan and Jefferson would have been taken down in episode 1. Nathan would have been discovered in the bathroom, gun in hand, as he stood over Chloe's body. He would have ratted out Jefferson, and none of the other chaos that we've witnessed would have happened the way it did. We know that because we'll have an option here shortly to change the past again or leave it as it is, but we're not there yet. At a very basic level, the writers want us to believe that the act of saving Chloe somehow caused the storm. That Max doing the very human thing, taking advantage of the mysterious power she was granted, was the wrong move. And what was the purpose of this whole experiment? Is there some god sitting back and laughing as Max has to go through hell, seeing her friend potentially die over and over while wielding the strange power to fix it every time? It's completely senseless because if she never got the power, the perpetrators of the crime that really kickstarted this whole thing would be taken down just the same. And having a tornado take out the entire town based on that one instinctive action is about the dumbest piece of writing I've seen in any of these games that I've talked about. The final choice in the game wound up actually being a no-brainer for me because of that fact alone. I refused to accept that the tornado was tied to Chloe being saved, and I refused to use Max's time travel to go back and let Chloe die. Yeah, the final decision in the game, the thing that we have spent 5 episodes working up to, is to either go back in time again using the photo we took of the butterfly to let Nathan shoot her and play things out from there, or let the tornado destroy Arcadia Bay and apparently wipe out everyone in town in the process. For me, as much as I enjoyed the banter between Chloe and Max, this decision was more out of spite than anything. The tornado should have been an omen, not a real thing. The game should have ended when we figured out it was Jefferson and went back in time to get him and Nathan caught with an early tip to David. If they really wanted to play up the choices, they should have allowed us to build a relationship with Kate and Chloe, both, and then put us in a situation where we had time to save just one of them as our rewind ability stopped working just when we needed it the most. Anything, literally anything, would have been better than this ending in my eyes. And if you like the game, I don't fault you, and I don't expect my opinion to be shared by you. We each like what we like, and the opinions that I share in my videos are my own. I'll share insight and information to tie the games that I talk about to the real world, but in the end, this game was just too much for me. And I want to really stress something here, because I've seen a few breakdowns of Life is Strange as I've been working on forming my thoughts for the series. A few examples of the kind of things that a lot of the game's critics seem to point out is the unrealistic dialogue, or even the campy indie music that it uses, or some of the weirder moments the game has, and I really don't mind any of those things. Yeah, the dialogue was a bit odd at times, and some of the situations presented were a little over the top, but I can forgive those things pretty easily. Some of them are design choices, and some are just little flaws in the writing that you just kind of accept when you're playing games. Even the best games have moments where you just have to kind of go along with it for the sake of the story. But to me, that's the most important part right there. The story. You can have mostly passable characters that get along well, and good or bad dialogue, and even have subpar world building. But if the story is broken, the whole thing falls apart. And a large part of the story falls on the shoulders of how it ends. I was irritated several times with the way things were going in my playthrough of Life is Strange, but I was also ready to forgive a lot of those transgressions and just move on until they presented me with that final choice. Pretending like it all just went back to the decision to save Chloe in the beginning, a decision that we had no choice but to make, meant that we never really had any agency in the game. Sure, we could rewind and make different decisions, say or do something different to get a different outcome, but the main threat of the game, a storm coming to wipe out the town, was something forced into being as a way to force a choice that doesn't even make sense in the first place. Just imagine for a second, the rewind ability doesn't fail on the roof and we're able to save Kate no matter what. She's going through a difficult time, and we spend some time with her between bouts of working with Chloe to solve Rachel Amber's disappearance. We figure things out, Nell, Jefferson, and Nathan, and get the trip to San Francisco as the winners of the Everyday Heroes contest. Returning from that trip, we meet up with Chloe and Kate, introducing our two friends and thinking everything is fine. Maybe there's a car crash or some other incident that endangers both of them at the same time, and we find out in that moment that the rewind power has stopped working, so we can't go back and stop the event from happening. And there's only time to save one or the other. Maybe by that time we've even got to know Kate's parents pretty well, and we know how much she means to them. Now we have an actual ethical dilemma. Do we save Chloe, who would have died anyway at Nathan's hands in the beginning, or do we save Kate, who's already been through so much and has been a positive light in the world in her own way? At this point, I've kind of gone on longer than I meant to, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts in the comments. Was I too harsh on Life is Strange? If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to Lost in Games here on YouTube so you don't miss any videos in the Philosophy and Ethics in Games series. If you want to help out in other ways, I've got a Patreon and channel memberships, and signing up for either helps me get new games for future breakdowns and hardware to store those games on, while granting you cool perks like having your name on the screen and early access to videos. I want to thank you all for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.